All right, pop quiz. You're driving into work and you get a phone call. Our systems are down. We're locked out.
Whew.
We can't turn anything on. What do you do?
Oh man, this is bad. Got to get that resume out. Really? That's the episode we're working on. That's episode 7. Yeah.
Kicking it off, episode 7, with some exciting stuff, right? How do you plan for, I hate to say the inevitable cyber event, but what we see is it's almost not a matter of when or if, it's a matter of when.
Yeah.
We're starting to see these things happen so frequently. To not have a plan in place is really just, I don't want to say negligent, but you're really doing your organization and your constituents, for that matter, a disservice, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to put it bluntly.
And that's why we're doing this episode,
right?
Is because we've seen the conversations evolve. We did an episode earlier on disaster recovery planning and backups, right?
Yeah.
And we know that that's only part of the story. It's a very an IT-centric part of the story. But the story really is, how does your organization maintain its operations in the event of a disaster, whether it's cyber-related or it's natural?
Yeah. Yeah, you can lose access to IT systems. And we all rely on, these electronic devices, not only in our personal lives, but especially in our professional lives, to perform our job functions, right? We're in public service. So our main role and goal is to provide services of some sort to our citizens, right? If we lose access to this, our immediate thought is, oh, well, IT can just restore us, get us back up and running, whatever. But what if that's a long period of time? What if we have to go, because the city doesn't shut down, our organization doesn't shut down. We have to continue to operate, especially if we're talking about mission critical type services. How do we do that?
Well, that's why we need to have the business impact analysis and the business continuity planning part of the conversation. And,
right.
And that's an exciting part of this episode, but this is a business related topic, as you just pointed out, is how do we continue the operations providing the vital services that we give to our citizens in the event of a disaster,
right?
Cyber or natural.
But we don't know what those are until we sit down with department leaders, department heads, and have the conversation.
Yes.
It's easy to assume that our IT infrastructure and our IT security team, our IT services have it covered, right? But we've never had the conversation. We don't know that for a fact. And unfortunately, they're probably making a lot of assumptions about what I do as a utility billing supervisor every day. So getting all those department heads together and having the conversation, what systems do you use? What services do you provide? If you lose access to this, how do you continue to operate? And that's where the first step needs to be taken, right?
Right. So that's exactly the premise of business impact analysis. And so many organizations have gone through this and many have avoided it. It's a very, very involved planning session to do a BIA, and why we brought it up today in our podcast. And by the way, we'll provide links for templates for those of you who want to look at just what all is involved. And I want to be very clear, this is not a 1-hour conversation to have with your operational folks or your business units of your organization. This is a major event. You may have to create a committee or a steering committee that handles this BIA planning, because it's going to lead to what we then call our business continuity plan. And a great example is, let's say you walk into City Hall one day and there was a fire overnight that gutted the building. First thing you got to decide is, okay, was anybody hurt? Do I have to take care of any people issues, any life safety issues? But then the next one is going to be, okay, how do we function as a city hall and provide services to our users after this event? And that needs to have been something you've already planned ahead of time. You have to have a secondary location you may go to, a way you put the word out to your constituents that we're not going to be available at 111 Main Street anymore. There's been an incident. If you need vital services, go to 200 Elm Street, where we're setting up a new operation. And those downstream conversations are part of what we call business continuity planning.
Right.
So BIA is where you identify the risks and the challenges that your group may face. We're fortunate here in the United States in Texas, that we don't worry about major earthquakes too much, although that may be a changing topic. So we probably don't want to plan for that, but certainly tornadoes and hurricanes and other natural events. And unfortunately, cybersecurity events, which are disasters as well, are things we need to plan for.
Yeah, and planning for each and individual one of those is important, but there's a lot of overlap between those, right? I mean, some of the things that you plan for a fire or natural disaster, relocating, just continuing to provide services might be related to a cyber incident also, right? You may lose access to a network or a system, and you have to create a manual process to be able to continue to operate. And I think one of the important things to remember is we get so focused on continuing to provide services for our citizens. We need to remember our employees at this time too, right? Because I don't know how most organizations are, but ours, we get paid at the middle of the month and the end of the month. And guess what? Employees become accustomed to getting paid. So we need to make sure we continue to be able to offer payroll services, benefits, employee assistance. All of those things are important components of your continuity plan also. So I just mentioned that to not neglect your internal.
No, that's a great example of this. Unfortunately, in one of our Stronger Together podcasts, I think it's episode 9, where one of our city managers, one of our members, experienced a major ransomware event 2 days before Christmas, and had to experience all those things you just described. We've got to take care of our people. We've got to make sure that they're getting paid, but then we've got to make sure we restore citizen services, and those were very difficult. I bet, looking back, that city manager wishes that they had sat down and done a full business impact analysis and had worked together to create this business continuity plan. It might have made some of the decisions they had to make under pressure a lot more well-defined, and the outcomes maybe have been better for them.
Right. Yeah. So identifying the risks, identifying the critical business functions, determining or figuring out manual processes to continue operations, and then setting some very important objectives, right? We call it RPO, RTO, recovery point objective, recovery time objective, bringing your IT in to determine what those points in time are. And basically that just means how long can we go before we absolutely have to have systems recovered to be able to continue operations, right? So those are important objectives that you need to work through. Without doing this exercise, unfortunately, your IT staff are making some assumptions that can leave you exposed, right?
So in the BIA is where you get that foundational information laid down. And I also want to mention that one of the things you need to identify in there, very common in today's world, are any interdependencies you may have. Yeah. You may have partners that you rely on their systems. You may have vendors who provide support for existing systems. You may be using their platform as a service in the cloud or their software. Telecom services, we are very familiar with using cell phones in our daily business, but our networks need to be up, and what do we do if those are not up, and things like that. So in the BIAs, when you sit down and you identify those risks, those major operational systems that you are responsible for, and those interdependencies that those systems rely on. Yeah. And then that flows into what you started mentioning, and that is, okay, now we got to come up with a business continuity plan that says, how are we going to go to plan B? What does plan B look like? Is it a Big Chief tablet and a number 2 pencil? Is it an alternative location, like in the scenario I gave earlier, or a little bit of both? And people need to be familiar with that. And then you've got to be able to implement planning that will support that. Okay, where are those Big Chief tablets? Who's got the number 2 pencils? And did somebody bring a pencil sharpener?
And whose responsibility is it?
Yes.
Right? I mean, this is not a executive at your highest level of your organization and your IT director in one department. This is your department heads across your entire organization. This is a meeting that takes place with, depending on the size of your entity, 10, 15, maybe 20 people in the room. Mm-hmm. I think we get so focused on, a cyber incident, and the focus is on IT, that it's important to remember that, and this, I don't know if this upsets some people when I say this, but IT is a support function of your organization. We're a government entity. We're not in the IT business. We're in the providing services to our citizens business. Yeah. And IT is a support function of that.
And IT can get caught in the middle. In my career, I've been that guy in the crosshairs. And this is why also in your BIA, you need to prioritize your services that you offer, right? Is the water department more important than the utility billing department? I don't know. That's a business decision that business leaders have to make. But it will direct your IT to take their finite number of resources and allocate them appropriately. If I have 20 spare computers and the building went up in smoke, who gets the 20 computers first?
Right.
And you can bet that during the outage, it's a difficult time to adjudicate that.
Yeah.
You want to do that in advance and let those business leaders know.
Yeah, I mean, every department head, of course, thinks that their operations are important. And it's funny because I did a presentation about a year ago to a group and used a news story about a city here in Texas that had a cyber incident. And in the story, they had a statement that was very, very interesting to me. They talked about the services that they've lost, and they said they're having difficulty with dispatching police to calls. They're having difficulty with billing utility customers, and then they are having difficulty issuing a new library card, right? And I thought one of these things is not like the other, and not taking anything away from the library function, but this is back to your priority function. You know, your mission critical stuff, your water, wastewater, police and fire, those types of things probably are going to gravitate towards the top. Your library card issuance might not be quite as critical, but that's an important function to somebody.
Yeah, that example highlights, though, that critical nature of this conversation. Many of us understand that life safety issues are priorities.
Right.
That part is usually not hard to comprehend. Where the difficulty comes in is as you get to some of those lower level services that you offer on a regular basis that people rely on, how do you prioritize those? And have you had those conversations? And have you set those expectations of recovery order with those leaders, right? If I'm the head of your library system and I've been told, hey, you're number 6 in line, then I understand there's 5 ahead of me. And I'll write my business continuity plan accordingly.
Yeah.
And the flip side is when you haven't, then I show up in line and it may be who got there first. And that's not a good plan to allocate those finite resources.
Yeah. You want to be in the room.
Yes.
You want to have the conversation to help prioritize. And this is not a one-time exercise either,
Yes.
right? I mean, people think it's check the box. Oh, we've done that. Check the box. Now we don't have to worry about it anymore. Your organization is organic. It grows. Your people change. You have people that get promoted, people retire, you have attrition. The roles have changed. Your organization may provide different services now. You may have an interdependency now that you didn't have previously. Maybe you dispatch for another entity that you didn't dispatch for, 6 months ago. So that's why it's important, I think, to make sure that the focus on this is not a one-time check the box exercise, that this is something that needs to be addressed probably on an annual basis at least.
Yeah, and that prioritization will also help you coordinate outside organizations that are responding to help you. Let's say you have a major cybersecurity event. You may be in a position where even some state resources are offering to help. If you haven't prioritized your recovery steps and your plan, you don't know where to tell them to help you first and how to allocate their resources.
Yeah, you don't want a third party coming in that's not familiar with your organizational setup trying to dictate what they think might be best for you.
That's right.
Right? You need to drive that ship, not diminishing the services they can provide, because I think they're critical and they're essential, especially when we talk about a cyber insurance policy that can come in and assist in the recovery from a cyber incident. But they need to know where to allocate the resources to get the best, bang for the buck.
You want to put the salve on the wound where you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other thing I'll tell you that ultimately, if you can do this business impact analysis process, and we're going very quickly here, this is a much more involved conversation that we can have with our members, and you create a business continuity plan, now your IT support can give you a really good disaster recovery plan that supports those objectives that you've detailed for them. And you may actually even find that you can save some money by doing this. And I'll give you a great example that happened in my career. We had acquired an outsourced system, and they offered us some really short recovery time objectives, which we took advantage of.
Sure.
But there was a major system dependency. We had an internal system A that had to supply data to this outsourced system B. In our disaster recovery plan, internal system A was going to come up after 3 days, 72 hours. But we were paying this outsourced vendor for 4-hour recovery time. Well, it would do no good for them to bring the system up in 4 hours because the system that it required to connect with wasn't going to be up for 3 days.
Right.
And so we were able to modify that external contract to relax that recovery time objective, save some money and some grief because there was no need for them to bring that system up so quickly.
But had you not taken the time to analyze that or have that conversation, I mean, that would have been an expenditure that wasn't necessary. You're paying for something you didn't need.
That's right. And so that misalignment of resources, and that was a case where it was a positive. A lot of times the cases that you find out that our disaster recovery plan is not going to bring that up anytime within your expectations. And so now there needs to be this meeting where you sit down and say, okay, what can we afford? What's the best use of the resources we have and still meet some of these demands to restore these systems? And it has to be a business agreement.
Yeah. I think where we can help is making sure that our members, when they're creating these plans, are taking the right steps in the right order, right? I applaud people for being proactive. You know, we have this conversation with members all the time, and I always make sure to tell them, thinking about this and creating the plan, great job, kudos. Let's make sure we're doing it in the right order to make sure that it's beneficial to your organization. I think that's the point of this podcast, right? Is to make sure that, we're all trying to get to this goal, you know, the disaster recovery plan, incident response plan, but we want to make sure that we're not putting the saddle or the cart before the horse, right? Make sure we're doing them in the right order to get the most benefit from that.
Yeah, and this business planning conversation is not an IT conversation. I just want to reiterate that. The IT group will benefit from the results of this business planning process, and we want to make sure our members have actively engaged in that it has the feedback from the business operational units so that then you can begin to work on a disaster recovery plan that will support those business objectives and hopefully get you back on track sooner than later.
Yeah. And unfortunately, this is not one of those things that, you know, if you call us and say, do you have to have a template, we can just hand you a piece of paper and you say, you're good to go, right? This is a little bit more in depth than that.
Yeah, there's so many variations to the services that our organizations provide to citizens that, you know, it really is unique to them. And then, you know, it's not a one-time build it and forget it either, because your business evolves, your services evolve as you provide them, or the mechanism you use to provide them to your citizens. And your plan needs to be reviewed to make sure that it's keeping up with those changes.
Yeah. So if you had to say just one thing, where should an organization start?
They should start with their BIA. Okay. They should reach out to their RMA or to Cyber Squad and ask us to send them a template, give them some information that might help them start. I would imagine that city managers are already having these conversations on other levels. And just to make sure that you include your IT people in the conversation so that they can tell you what's possible with what you have and give you estimates on any changes that you may want to make if you come up with a big gap that you've identified.
Yeah. So it's a big task. I mean, it's a big step to take. Yes. I always like to say, you know, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. You got to start. You got to start somewhere, and this is the place to start with a business impact analysis. So I would say this is one of the additional things that we can help with, right? The Cyber Squad. We're dedicated to our members, and these are no-cost things that we can provide you with, that we can help you. So if you have an issue with not knowing where to start and want to have the conversation, reach out to us. Our email, cybersquad@tmlirp.org. Again, like and subscribe to our channel. Make sure you're aware of any new content that we put out. But if you want to get started with something like this, reach out. We'll be happy to have this conversation.
That's a great topic.
All right. Anything else?
Nope. That's been a good one.
All right. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.